Hey, I'm back from my trip to the Bahamas, and I'm here today to read several chapters. Sorry, I have been MIA the last few days. I got in super duper late Monday night, and then Tuesday I pretty much rested all day. I was worn out. And yesterday, I caught up on my book study. So here I am today. I am so sorry that I have been MIA, like I said. But I'm back now, and I'm ready to read with you again. Let's start with Chapter 3 of our Dark Day in the Deep Sea. I can tell you, after being on the boat, that I didn't see any octopus or squid or whatever this thing is. And thankfully, but I did see some amazing blue water. See behind the squid? Beautiful waters. Beautiful, beautiful waters. So, I'm glad to be back, and here we go. Chapter 3. Chapter 3's title is called A Creature Named Henry. Jack threw their book into his pack and quickly ran to join Annie. "Hi," he said to the three men. "Don't be afraid," said Annie. "We come in peace." The three men kept gawking. Do you know what that means to gawk? It's like, oh, what? Okay. Who are you?" one of the sailors sputtered. Jack and Annie walked closer. "I'm Jack, and this is Annie," said Jack. The man in the bow tie stepped forward. He had a long mustache and a big, friendly smile. "My name is Henry," he said. "I came ashore to look for rare butterflies, plants, and shells. But it seems I have found a rare creature called a Jack and Annie instead." "And we found a creature called a Henry," said Annie, giggling. "That's what we named a pteranodon when we went to the time of the dinosaurs." "I beg your pardon?" said Henry. She's teasing," said Jack. "What an unusual wit," said Henry, his eyes sparkling. "Well, you have not only found a Henry, you have also found a Joe and a Tommy, the two able seamen who rowed me here." "Hi, Joe and Tommy," said Annie. She gave the two sailors a big smile, but Joe and Tommy didn't smile back. They were both scowling. "Where are you from?" Joe asked suspiciously. "Frog Creek, Pennsylvania," said Annie. "Where is that?" asked Tommy. "America," said Jack. "How nice," said Henry. "Why are you here?" We're on vacation," said Annie. "We're camped with our family back there somewhere," she waved vaguely. "Vacation?" said Henry. "Our parents like to vacation in really out-of-the-way places," said Annie. Henry chuckled. "Americans. Are you a scientist from the HMS Challenger?" Jack said. He was eager to change the subject. "Why, yes," said Henry. "I'm one of the team trying to solve the riddles of the deep." Jack loved the sound of that. "Riddles of the deep? What kind of riddles have you solved so far?" he asked. "Well, for one thing, we've learned that the ocean floor is absolutely teeming with life," said Henry. "You didn't already know that?" asked Annie. "We thought it was probably the case," said Henry, "but mind you, many people cannot imagine that life can exist in the icy darkness of the deep. In fact, some still believe there is no floor to the ocean at all. They think the sea goes down forever. What do you think? Do you think the sea goes down forever? I'll tell you, I was just on the ship looking down at the water, and it did seem mighty, mighty deep." "Are you serious?" said Annie. "Ha! I guess you'll be letting them know that most of the ocean is not more than 2 miles deep. Of course, some ocean trenches are deeper than 6 miles, but—" "Annie," said Jack. "My, you know a lot about the sea," said Henry, looking at Annie with curiosity. "Well, I know that mountain ranges and volcanoes are down there too," said Annie. Jack leaned in close to Annie. "Stop showing off," he said under his breath. I mean, maybe, just maybe," Annie said to Henry. "Of course, I'm only guessing." "You are a very good guesser," said Henry. "On our voyage, we've collected many volcanic rocks from the deep." "Cool," said Annie. "How'd you get them? Many subs?" "Many subs?" asked Henry. "You know, they carry you down into the deep sea," said Annie. "Annie," said Jack between his teeth. He gave her a look that said, "Just stop." Jack was pretty sure mini subs hadn't been invented by the early 1870s. He quickly changed the subject again. "And you study butterflies too?" he said, pointing to Henry's net. "And seashells?" "Indeed I do," said Henry. "In fact, I came ashore to search for a rare shell just now, and I think I may have found its cousin." He opened his book to a page that showed a pencil drawing of the shell. "Would you like us to help you look for more?" asked Annie. Here's a picture. See the shell he drew? Really cool. "Why, thank you," said Henry, "but I have quite successfully found what I came for. We'll be going back to the ship now." "Oh, please, can we visit the HMS Challenger?" Annie blurted out. "Out of the question," said the sailor named Joe. "Well, said Henry. "Sir, the captain would never approve of bringing children on board." Tommy broke in. "It's absolutely against the rules." Henry looked at Jack and Annie. Jack didn't want to break any rules, but at the same time, he really wanted to visit the ship. "We'd really like to learn more about sea exploration," he said. He gave the scientist a hopeful smile. "We promise not to get in anyone's way," said Annie, "and our parents like us to learn new things." Henry turned back to the two seamen. "Surely such bright and curious young people should be allowed to visit our ship," he said. "Since we'll be drifting and dredging in this area all day, we can return them to shore before nightfall." Joe and Tommy frowned at each other, but Joe finally gave a quick nod. "Yes," Annie said. "Thanks," said Jack. "We promise we won't cause any trouble." "See that you don't," said Henry with a smile. "Joe and Tommy, would you mind lending our two visitors your life preservers?" "Never fit 'em, sir," said Joe. "Well, we must do what we can to keep them safe," said Henry. The two seamen grudgingly handed Jack and Annie their bulky vests. "So these are old-fashioned life preservers," thought Jack. The vests were made of blocks of cork tied together. Even though Jack buckled his tightly, it hung low on his body, almost slipping off. "I'm afraid they are rather big," said Henry, "but still they might save you should we capsize." "Don't worry," said Annie. "We're really good swimmers." "We should go now, sir," Joe said impatiently. "Yes, yes," Henry said. "Let us be off." Joe and Tommy pushed the rowboat into the shallow water. While Jack and Annie had been talking with Henry, the water had turned choppy. Dark gray clouds had rolled in, hiding the sun. "Climb in after me," Henry told Jack and Annie, and they followed him into the rowboat. Jack's backpack wouldn't fit over his life jacket, so he clutched the pack to his chest as Joe and Tommy pushed the boat farther into the ocean. The sailors jumped in, picked up their oars, and began rowing back to ship. All right, chapter 4 is called Off the Ship, with an exclamation mark. Uh-oh. "The wind's against us," Joe said as he and Tommy rowed. Even after the boat moved past the breakers, it kept bouncing up and down on the swell of the waves. Water splashed over the sides and soaked Jack's clothes. But Jack wasn't worried about the wind or water. He was worried about being seasick, because waves of nausea had started to come over him. "Sorry, it's a bit of tough going," Henry said. "We can take it," Annie said. "We hope," thought Jack. The last thing he wanted to do was throw up, especially in front of Joe and Tommy. "We should get back just in time to see the men haul up this morning's catch," said Henry. "This is so much fun," said Annie, her eyes shining as the little rowboat bobbed up and down. Jack wasn't having any fun at all. To keep from being sick, he gripped his backpack, closed his eyes, and gritted his teeth. "Every day we make new discoveries," said Henry. "Off the coast of Argentina, we found over 100 new species. Giant worms several feet long, shrimp the size of lobsters. Caught them in our nets, didn't we, Joe?" "Aye," said Joe as he pulled on the oars. "But the creature that's never been caught is the one these mates should be worried about." "What creature is that?" asked Annie. "The great monster," answered Tommy. Jack opened his eyes. "What? You mean like a shark?" he asked. "No, no, lad. 'Tis much worse than any shark. Even the 20-foot tiger shark that's been following us," said Tommy. The sailor blinked nervously. "Whoa, 20-foot tiger shark?" thought Jack. He looked at the dark water for a shark fin. "Aye, this monster's much bigger than any shark," shouted Joe. "They say it looks like a cross between a dragon and a gigantic starfish." "Nay, more like a floating nest of snakes, mate," said Tommy with a shudder. "They say it'll curl around your body and strangle you to death." "A floating nest of snakes?" Annie asked. "Ugh, that gives me the heebie-jeebies." Jack gulped. He turned to Henry. "Have you seen the monster?" he asked the scientist. Henry shook his head. "I've never seen it," he said, "but a few of our crewmen claim to have glimpsed something monstrous in these waters just yesterday." "Don't be scared, mates," said Joe. "If we see a monster, we'll hurl our harpoons at him." "We'll shoot him with our cannons," said Tommy. He and Joe laughed loudly. Maybe the sailors on the ship are just trying to scare the scientist, Jack thought hopefully. Why would they be laughing? When they reached the HMS Challenger, the rowboat drew alongside the big ship, rocking on the water. Jack gripped his pack tighter as more waves of seasickness washed over him. "You go first, mate," Joe said to Jack. "You're looking a bit green." Clutching his pack under one arm, Jack grabbed the sides of the ladder. He held on tightly and climbed from the wooden hull of the ship up to the top deck. Annie came after him, then Henry, Joe, and Tommy. When they were all on the deck, the two seamen hauled up the rowboat. Okay, so here's a picture of them getting up onto the ship from the rowboat. Jack took a long, deep breath. Though the large ship rocked in the wind, it wasn't nearly as bad as the small rowboat's movement on the waves. Looking around the deck, Jack saw teams of sailors working. Some were coiling thick ropes. Others were hauling up strange-looking buckets. Jack turned to ask Jack what the sailors were doing. But Henry was staring at a tall man in a white uniform and a heavy-set older man in a dark suit who were walking briskly toward them. The two men were frowning. "Oh no," murmured Henry, "prepared to meet thy doom." "Who are they?" asked Annie. Before Henry could answer, the man in white shouted, "What have you done this time, Mr. Mosley?" Jack moved closer to Annie. He clutched his pack to his life vest. "Well, Captain, started Henry. "Goodness, what have you brought up from the sea now, Henry?" the portly man asked. "A four-legged, four-armed creature of the deep?" "Yes, Professor, it's a Jack and Annie from America," said Henry. "I found the creature vacationing on the island." The portly man smiled. "Oh, I see. I thought perhaps it was the monster that was sighted by some of the men yesterday." "The monster again?" thought Jack. "This ship is not a place for children, Mr. Mosley," the captain said gruffly. "Yes, I know, sir," said Henry, "but these two children are extraordinary. They hardly seem like children at all. They're quite independent and have great knowledge of the sea. I thought it might be permissible to bring them aboard for the afternoon and then return them to shore." "I'm afraid it goes against all the ship's rules," said the captain. "It's not Henry's fault, Captain," Annie piped up. "We begged him to let us visit your ship." "Ah, did you now?" the portly man asked, his eyes twinkling. "Why is that?" "We love the ocean," said Annie, "and we'd really like to learn more about sea exploration, sir," said Jack. "Well, you've come to the right place," said the man. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Professor Thompson, the scientific director of the Challenger. The professor is one of the world's most renowned experts on the ocean," said Henry. Wow, said Annie. Well, I don't know about that, the professor said modestly, but he put his thumbs in his vest and began speaking as if he were giving a lecture. Since the beginning of time, the secrets of the deep have been hidden from us, but now with our expedition, we have learned many things. Like what? Asked Jack. We have used miles and miles of steel wire to measure the depth of the sea, said the professor. We have lowered thermostats to measure the temperatures in the deep. But perhaps most important of all, we are learning about the amazing creatures who live in the dark regions far beneath the ocean waves. That is all well and good, Professor, the captain broke in, but I want these children off the ship immediately, before the weather gets worse. Do you hear, Mr. Mosley? Off the ship. Well, now we know why it's titled Off the Ship. Okay, so chapter 5, last chapter of today. Chapter 5's title is Ooze. Ooze? Yeah, ooze. Okay. The captain turned and strode away. Sorry, friends, Henry said to Jack and Annie, but the captain's in charge. He looked around. I see Joe and Tommy are helping the men bring up the catch now. As soon as they are free, I will ask them to take you back to shore. I am very sorry. That's okay, said Annie. You did what you could. Before you young people leave, perhaps you would like to see today's specimens, asked the professor. Sure, said Jack and Annie together. Then come along, said the professor. Every single day we make new discoveries. Hurrying with Annie across the deck, Jack couldn't wait to see what had just been brought up from the deep. They followed Henry and the professor to a team of sailors pulling up large nets. The nets were shaped like giant bags with mops attached to the bottom. What are those mops for? Asked Annie. They sweep up sea animals from the floor of the ocean, explained Henry. We pull them from pitch darkness into the light of day, said the professor. That must scare them, said Annie. But the professor didn't seem to hear her. Over the years, we've hauled up tens of thousands of specimens, he said. As the sailors dumped the bags onto the deck, Jack saw mostly mud. But lying in the mud were tiny, squirmy pink and yellow fish and fiery orange sea stars. No monsters there, huh? Asked Annie. The professor looked at her. Not today, my dear, he said. I was just kidding, said Annie. Do you believe in monsters? Oh, well, the professor looked serious. The sea is very deep, my dear. It covers nearly 3/4 of the world. So I say to myself, might it not indeed hold many mysterious creatures, including monsters? Good point, thought Jack. But don't be afraid, children, said the professor. Someday we'll catch all the monsters and study them. We will conquer our fears through knowledge. Won't we, Henry? Yes, sir, said Henry. Conquer our fears through knowledge. The professor repeated his thought with enthusiasm. I shall add that to my lectures. Low thunder rolled in the sky. Jack looked up. Black clouds hovered overhead. A strong gust of wind swept over the deck. Attention, the captain shouted, heading toward them. A squall is headed our way. For now, take the children below to the main deck. Yes, sir, said Henry. He smiled at Jack and Annie. Well, friends, I suppose you get to stay with us a little while longer after all. Yay, Annie said softly. Only those on watch stay on deck, the captain shouted to his crew. Everyone else, get below. Henry led Jack and Annie away, just as the rain began to pour down. Water dripped from Jack's hair and backpack and life vest as he and Annie followed Henry down a steep flight of stairs to a dimly lit hallway. Our ship was converted from a war vessel to a ship of sea laboratories, Henry said. The Navy removed 16 of the 18 guns on board to make room for them. Would you like to see mine? Oh, yes, said Jack. He couldn't wait to see an actual sea laboratory. Follow me. Henry unlocked a door and showed Jack and Annie into a large, dim room. There was a small skylight overhead. Rain pounded against the glass. Henry struck a match and lit a couple of oil lamps. Shadows danced around the room. Jack smiled and let out a deep sigh. He loved the Sea Lab. Shelves were lined with hundreds of different sized bottles. The bottles were filled with floating blobs. In the middle of the room was a wooden table. It held maps, rulers, thermometers, bowls with gooey-looking stuff, and a big microscope. Henry pointed at the microscope. "Would you like to see something remarkable?" he asked. "Oh, yes," said Henry. She peered through the eyepiece. "Whoa, that's amazing," she breathed. "Let me see it," said Jack. He put his backpack down on the table and looked in the microscope. He saw the tiny skeleton of a seahorse. "Cool," he said. "That seahorse is no bigger than a grain of sugar," said Henry. "But of course I'm fascinated by larger creatures as well. Why, just yesterday I spent several hours studying the ear bone of a dolphin and the tooth of a shark. And what's in all those bottles?" asked Annie. She pointed at the rows and rows of bottles on Henry's shelves. "Many curiosities," said the scientist. "That large one, for instance, holds a creature that looks like a giant sock. Some call it a blubberfish, but it's not a fish at all. It is made up of millions of tiny sea creatures." "Ew," said Annie. "And there's a rare sea slug," said Henry. He pointed to a bright yellow blob floating in a clear liquid. "Nice color," said Jack. "We study whatever we bring up from the deep," said Henry. "We measure the specimens and identify them. Then we preserve them in bottles of alcohol and label the bottles." "So all those bottles are full of dead sea creatures?" said Annie. "Oh no, many bottles are simply filled with ooze from the bottom of the sea," said Henry. "Ooze?" said Jack. "The official name for mud," said Henry, smiling. "Here, feel it." Henry picked up one of the plates on the table and held it out to Jack and Annie. They rubbed the sticky, wet mud between their fingers. "Ooze is a good name for it," said Jack. Henry gave them a cloth to wipe their hands. So here's a picture of the professor in his laboratory, and Jack and Annie looking at all the stuff. Then he picked up a large book from the table, and here is the notebook where I transfer my drawings of natural history specimens, he said. He opened the book. Inside were beautiful watercolors of shells, plants, and butterflies. "These are great," said Jack. Henry's notebook reminded him of the notebooks he'd seen in Leonardo da Vinci's studio. "This is beautiful," said Annie. She reached across Henry's table and picked up a gleaming round seashell. The shell was white with curved reddish-brown lines. "Yes," Henry said softly, "my nautilus shell." "Is this one of your specimens?" asked Annie. "No," said Henry. "I don't consider that a specimen. It's more like a treasure. I'm afraid I grew quite fond of the little creature who once lived inside that shell." "What did he do?" asked Annie. "Oh, he just swam around a small tub I had for him," said Henry, "but he moved backwards. Rather funny. He filled himself with water and then squirted it out all over me," Henry smiled. "I was quite sad when he died. I wished I had returned him to the sea." Henry put the shell down and let out a quiet sigh. "Ah, silly to think that way, I know." "Not silly at all," said Annie. The ship's bell rang. Time to go," said Henry. "The captain runs a tight ship. It's against the rules to be late. So let us be off to the ward room." "What's the ward room?" Jack asked. "That's where the scientists and naval officers eat," said Henry. "Eat?" Jack said weakly. The thought of food made him feel queasy again. "Yes," said Henry. He blew out the 2 oil lamps. "Come along, you must join us. It's lunchtime." All right, so chapter 6 we'll start with tomorrow. It's called Pea Soup. PEA. Like the green stuff. All right. what did you think about their adventure so far? Would you like to go on a big old ship like that and see all the creatures from the bottom of the sea? Some of those, I bet they had never ever seen before. And Jack and Annie were having a hard time they were having to pretend like they hadn't seen some of the things before too. So anyway, really interesting. All right, so tomorrow we will pick up on chapter 6 and see what happens and see if they ever get to see this big old creature. So I am so proud of y'all for keeping up and reading. This is our 4th chapter book of the summer. So great job. All right, talk to y'all tomorrow. Bye.